Hi, Nick with City Rain. I'll show you how to properly reactivate your double check point of connection to your sprinkler system. So here's the #1 complaint of people that first try to do this themselves and get squirted in the face. If this has happened to you, it doesn't mean that something's broken. It just means that you skipped a step and you're probably angry that you've been squirted in the face. So the reason that we see water coming out of these test cocks is because we leave them open over the winter so they do not freeze. Here's a better example of a test cock, so you can see it's basically a ball valve. See how that ball cylinder there moves around and around? So what we want to do is leave this slot here is how that turns. We want to leave it at like a 45-degree angle. I'll show you an example of why water can be trapped. Here's another ball valve. So over the winter, water is trapped inside there and it splits the brass. So we don't want that to happen. So water will get trapped in there if the valve is all the way closed or all the way open. But if it's halfway open, halfway closed, that vapor can escape. So before we turn it on in the spring, what we want to do is close those test cocks. So I like to have a couple different sizes of flathead screwdriver. If I can find my stubby. Here it is. The stubby is a good choice because it can usually fit into tight spaces. You'll see these things are at different angles. And what you want to do is get it and turn that slot so it's perpendicular. That's closed. So this would be all the way open. This is all the way closed. And if you come over here, see how there's still water squirting out of this guy? I find the slot there and I turn it till it shuts off. So it might take some practice. You may want to get to them as best you can. So there's 4 test cocks on a double check. Now you can see there's 2 ball valve handles, and that's for redundancy and testing purposes. And those are left at 45-degree angles too, for the same reason that we showed before. And so we want to make those parallel, all the way open, so that the device is all the way open. Now sometimes these handles can be sticky, kind of tricky to turn, and a little awkward in the angle to get pliers on. So I made some homemade tools that are pretty handy. These are just 1/2-inch fittings, 1/2-inch 45 PVC, 1/2-inch 90, so that you can hook it. That's the perfect size. It fits over the handle, gives you some leverage, to get them. Can you see from this angle over here? Can you see what I'm doing here?
Mm-hmm.
So these little handles are just like if you were to shut it off, that's the off position. But we want them fully on. So parallel with the device is open, is on. Every spring when I see these handles, they're stainless steel. They start to rust over time. So I like to squirt a little 3-in-1 oil on that nut and that handle to prolong the life of them. Okay, so now we're just about ready to fire up the main valve here that activates the water to the device, because our test cocks are closed. But I'm going to open up the downstream one and stick a pressure gauge in there so it'll tell me a few things. I'll show you. So I have here a 1/4-inch brass street L, so I can get the angle I want in there. Get that sort of tight. So now that I'm putting on this pressure gauge, I'm gonna have to open up that test cock again so that we can read pressure. Okay, I'll just crack that open a little bit. Okay, so now you want to look at the gauge here. You see the needle starting to climb. The idea is we don't want to turn it on so fast that we get a pressure surge. Kind of want it to be gradual. So now that we've seen the needle stop, we can open it all the way. It's important to open these valves all the way. So now we have a static reading of about 55 psi. Now I'm going to do a pressure test, which is I'm going to turn off this first test cock, and I'm holding pressure. That means nothing's open downstream. So if I were to have a valve that's not closed all the way in the system, a slow leak somewhere, that needle would slowly drop. So this is a good news. I've got a steady needle when I pressurize, then shut the water off, so we're not losing any pressure anywhere. So I'm going to turn that back on. I don't see the needle budge one way or the other, so that's great. And I'm going to remove this. Got to turn this test cock off again. So it's important that you have good test cocks. So I'm going to grab something real quick from the truck to show you what can go wrong. So over time, the screwdriver slot on old test cocks can get stripped to where you can't even turn them anymore. So then you just have to replace them. Here's some examples of some old ones where they just get either kind of seized up and stuck where they won't turn, and the brass starts to break away. So you always want to make sure you have, a fairly decent test cock. So their lifespan is probably 15-20 years before something like that happens. So I wanted to say something about the dust caps here. And that's what these little plugs are. And all they're for is just to be sort of loosely hand tied in there a few turns. Their whole purpose is just to keep those threads clean. So some people, if they do it, turn it on themselves, and they get squirted, they'll find these things and they'll just crank them down in there as tight as they can to get that water to stop leaking. And then it creates a real problem later when they try to grind it in there so tight that they strip every little nub on it, and they're impossible to remove. And it's kind of a hassle for us because we need the test cocks for our troubleshooting, pressure test, and testing of the backflow device. So anyway, now we're fully turned on and ready to go. Check out the system zone by zone. So in review, we want to close the test cocks first before we pressurize. We want to pressurize slowly, and it's handy to have a pressure gauge. If you don't have a pressure gauge, and this is a great example here, we have a water meter right next to our point of connection. So we can just make sure that little wheel isn't spinning. You can see that. And it's standing still. 3-in-1 oil or WD-40 is great for clearing a lens too. It does something to make the light refract easier. It's better than water or rubbing it, because these will get foggy and scratchy. If you just put some lube on there, it makes it real easy to read. So we're in good shape here. We don't see any leaks from the pressure test or the meter. Meter's staying still. All right, that concludes the double check activation. How long was that?